It started with a single question no one could answer: why did St. Mary's Hospital, a place that had served the community for nearly a century, close its doors overnight? No warning, no public statement. Just locked gates, darkened windows, and silence. People whispered about financial trouble, but something didn't add up. Hospitals don't just vanish like that, especially not one with a spotless record and a fully booked patient list. A week later, Michael Turner, an archivist who'd worked at the county records office, was cataloging old municipal files when he stumbled across something odd: a dusty box, mislabeled and shoved behind a row of sealed case folders. Inside, brittle photographs, patient charts stamped confidential, and letters no one was ever meant to see. The air in that room felt colder, heavier. As Michael flipped through the files, his pulse quickened. There were names he recognized. People from town who had simply disappeared. And at the bottom of the stack, a single sheet of paper with 5 words scrawled in fading ink: "Do not open the East Wing." Whatever happened inside St. Mary's wasn't just an administrative error, it was deliberate, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury it. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him as he carried the box out of the archive. The hallway lights flickered just once, but it was enough to make him glance over his shoulder. No one there. Still, the unease followed him all the way home. That night, he spread the documents across his kitchen table. Patient intake forms dated only weeks before the closure, notes scribbled by doctors in a hurried, almost frantic hand. And photographs of an unfamiliar corridor, paint peeling, tiles cracked but clearly part of the hospital. A single figure appeared in 2 of the pictures, always turned away, always wearing the same pale uniform. Michael called an old friend, Claire Morrison, who'd worked as a nurse at St. Mary's until the day it shut down. When she answered, her voice was low, almost cautious. "Michael, where did you get those files?" she asked. "They were buried in county records," he said. "Claire, what happened in the East Wing?" Silence stretched on the line. He heard her breathing, faint and uneven. Then, just before she hung up, she whispered, "You need to stop looking." But by then, it was too late. The deeper Michael went, the more he realized this wasn't about missing paperwork or mismanaged funds. Someone had erased an entire part of the hospital's history, and the people who knew the truth were either too scared to speak or no longer around to tell it. The next morning, Michael drove to the outskirts of town, where the hospital loomed like an empty shell against the gray sky. Weeds curled through the cracks in the pavement, and rust had begun to eat at the gates. He parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, his breath fogging in the cool air. A side door near the loading dock hung slightly open, its lock broken. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and something faintly chemical. The silence pressed in on him, broken only by the soft echo of his footsteps. He passed abandoned gurneys, toppled wheelchairs, and bulletin boards with curling notices still tacked to them. In the central hallway, he found the East Wing door. It had been sealed with heavy chains, but someone had already cut them recently. The metal links lay scattered on the floor. Michael hesitated, every instinct telling him to turn back, but he pushed the door open. The corridor beyond was darker, colder, paint blistered on the walls and faded warning signs lined the doorframes: "Authorized personnel only." He stepped carefully, scanning the rooms as he went. Most were empty, stripped of equipment, but one door stood ajar with a faint draft slipping through. Inside was a small office, the desk overturned, drawers ripped out. Scattered across the floor were documents similar to the ones he'd found in the archive, only these bore a red stamp that read "Experiment Terminated." In the corner, a photograph pinned to the wall caught his eye. It showed a group of staff members smiling stiffly as if posing under protest. Among them was Claire, and beside her a man Michael didn't recognize, but his face had been crossed out in thick black ink. Michael crouched to gather the scattered papers, his fingers trembling as he skimmed their contents. The documents mentioned clinical trials, unauthorized, unreported, conducted on patients who'd been admitted for routine care. Dosages, test results, and the chilling phrase "subject unresponsive, proceed to next phase." Whoever had overseen these experiments had treated human lives as data points. A sudden sound made him freeze, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from deeper down the corridor. He killed his flashlight and held his breath, heart pounding in his ears. The steps stopped, then started again, closer this time. "Michael," a voice called softly, almost coaxing. It was Claire. But something in her tone was wrong, flat, rehearsed, like she was reading a line. He edged toward the doorway, keeping low, and saw her silhouette in the dim light. She wasn't alone. A tall man in a long coat stood beside her, motionless. "Why are you here?" Claire asked, her voice carrying down the hall. "You shouldn't have come." Michael backed away, clutching the files to his chest. "Claire, what is this? Who's behind all of this?" She didn't answer. The man beside her stepped forward, just enough for Michael to see the faint outline of his face. It was the same man from the photograph, the one with the black ink slashed through his features. Panic surged. Michael bolted down the hall, the sound of pursuit echoing behind him. He burst through the loading dock door into the daylight, lungs burning, and didn't stop running until he reached his car. As he sped away, he caught one last glimpse of the hospital in his rearview mirror. Claire stood at the gate, watching him, her expression unreadable. In her hand, she held a small black notebook, the same kind he'd seen listed in the confiscated files. And in that moment, Michael knew, whatever secrets sent Mary's hospital had buried, they were still being guarded by the very people who once worked there. Michael barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's face, blank yet strangely familiar, and Claire's expression, caught between warning and something colder. By morning, he'd made up his mind. If the authorities wouldn't investigate, he would. But first, he needed help from someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss him as paranoid. He drove to see Detective Aaron Mills, a retired cop who'd handled missing persons cases in the county for decades. Mills lived alone in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers and boxes of old case files. When Michael laid out the documents and the photograph on the table, Mills' brow furrowed. "I remember some of these names," Mills muttered, tapping a file with his weathered finger. "Patients who vanished from hospital records. Families never got answers. We suspected cover-ups, but nothing this organized." Michael leaned forward. "Do you recognize him?" He pointed at the black-inked face in the photograph. Mills squinted, then shook his head slowly. "No. But if his face was crossed out, someone wanted him erased. My guess, he wasn't supposed to leave that building alive." The weight of those words hung heavy. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine. Mills poured 2 cups of coffee, his hand steady despite the tension in the room. "You're in over your head, son. If they're willing to chase you out of an abandoned hospital in broad daylight, they're not afraid to make people disappear." Michael tightened his grip on the papers. "Then we have to move fast. These files, they're proof. If we can link them to the hospital board or anyone funding those experiments." "Careful," Mills interrupted. "People like this don't leave trails unless they want someone to follow the wrong one." Outside, a car engine idled for just a little too long before driving away. Neither man spoke, but both heard it. Somewhere in town, someone already knew they started digging. That evening, Michael parked his car 2 streets away from his apartment, just in case anyone was still watching. He carried the files inside under his jacket, every shadow on the stairwell feeling just a little too sharp. He barely had time to set the papers down before his phone buzzed. "No caller, it against his better judgment," he answered. "Michael," a woman's voice said, not Claire, someone older, steadier. "If you value your life, stop digging." St. Mary's wasn't shut down because of money. It was shut down to keep what happened there from spreading. "Who is this?" Michael demanded, but the line went dead. He stared at the phone, his pulse thudding in his throat. Then, gathering himself, he called Mills. "We're not alone in this," he said. "Someone's trying to warn me." An hour later, Mills arrived with a portable scanner. They digitized every page of the files, every note, every photograph, storing copies on encrypted drives. "If they come for us," Mills said grimly, "at least they won't be able to erase everything." Late into the night, they pieced together fragments of information. The experiments had been bankrolled by a private foundation with no clear address, no public face. The same initials appeared over and over in the doctor's notes. RK, whoever RK was, he'd signed off on every phase of the program. As they packed up, Mills paused by the window. Headlights, he murmured. A car sat at the far end of the street, engine off, no movement inside. Michael felt the hairs rise on his neck. You think it's them? I don't think they ever stopped watching, Mills replied. Somewhere in the darkness, a camera shutter clicked. By morning, Michael and Mills were running on little more than coffee and adrenaline. The files were now duplicated in 3 separate places, but that didn't make either of them feel safer. Whoever sat in that car last night hadn't made a move, they were just letting their presence be known. Mills suggested they track down former staff members who might still be willing to talk. Most had left town after the hospital closed, but one name stood out: Dr. Evelyn Carter, a junior physician on staff during the final year. She now lived in a small coastal town 2 hours away. When they arrived at her cottage, she looked startled to see them, her thin frame silhouetted in the doorway. I told myself this day would come, she said softly, ushering them inside. I wondered who would finally start asking questions. Michael spread the photographs and notes across her kitchen table. What were you doing to those patients? He asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Dr. Carter's eyes glistened, though she didn't look away. It started as a trial for an experimental anesthetic, she said, but it wasn't about pain relief, it was about control. Inducing compliance, suppressing memory. We thought we were helping until patients stopped waking up. And RK, Mills pressed, who is he? Carter hesitated, then whispered, Richard Kane. He wasn't a doctor, he was a sponsor. He came from money, old money. He said he could make the hospital untouchable if we agreed to his terms. Most of the board signed immediately. Michael felt a weight settle in his stomach. Where is he now? Carter's gaze shifted toward the window as though expecting to see someone there. You don't find Richard Kane, he finds you, and if you've already seen his name. She paused, lowering her voice to barely a breath. You're on borrowed time. Somewhere down the street, a black sedan slowed to a crawl before disappearing around the corner on the drive back from Dr. Carter's cottage. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that every passing car lingered a second too long in the rearview mirror. Mills kept his eyes on the road, jaw set, fingers gripping the wheel tighter than usual. Neither spoke until they were well past the highway turnoff. This isn't just about exposing the truth anymore, Mills finally said. It's about staying alive long enough to do it. They agreed to meet later that night at an old service station outside town, a place with no cameras and no steady traffic. Michael spent the afternoon copying the files again, burning them to disks, tucking them into envelopes addressed to newspapers and federal agencies. Just in case. He worked in silence, blinds drawn, every creak of the floorboards making his heart jump. When evening fell, he parked far from the station and approached on foot. Mills was already there, leaning against his car, scanning the tree line. We need a plan, Mills said, and we need someone higher up to take this seriously. Before Michael could answer, a figure emerged from the shadows. Claire, she looked exhausted, hair pulled back, her nurse's badge still clipped to her coat as if she hadn't taken it off in months. Don't send those files, she said quickly, voice low but urgent. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Michael stepped forward, anger breaking through his fear. Then explain it to me. What was Kane doing in that hospital? Claire glanced around as though expecting Kane himself to step out of the darkness. He wasn't testing medicine, she whispered. He was testing people, seeing how far he could push them, how much they'd obey if their memories could be rewritten. The patients were just the beginning, staff, board members, even me. Mills narrowed his eyes. Why warn us now? Because they know where you live, she said, her voice shaking, and tonight they're coming to collect everything you found. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of engines grew louder. Headlights swept briefly across the edge of the lot, then vanished. Michael felt his stomach drop. They were already surrounded. Mills killed the lone overhead light with a quick flick of his wrist, plunging the service station into darkness. Michael could hear his own breathing, fast and uneven, mingling with Claire's whispered instructions. "They won't come in guns blazing," she said. "They don't need to, they'll make you disappear without a sound, just like they did with the others." Outside, the soft crunch of tires on gravel stopped, doors opened, footsteps measured, unhurried circled the building. Mills signaled toward the rear exit, but before they could move, a voice called from the shadows, calm, smooth, "Michael Turner, Detective Mills." "Miss Morrison, you've been very busy." The man stepped into view beneath the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Mid-50s, immaculate suit, silver hair, Richard Kane, he smiled as though greeting old friends. "You have something that belongs to me," he said, his tone almost polite. "Hand over the files and this ends tonight." Michael tightened his grip on the envelope inside his jacket. "What were you doing to those patients?" he demanded, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. Kane's smile didn't falter. "Advancing science. Clearing away the weak to understand what makes the strong." Mills drew his sidearm, steady but outnumbered. Shadows moved behind Kane, 3 men, silent, disciplined, no hesitation in their posture. Claire stepped forward, blocking Michael instinctively. "You'll have to kill us," Mills growled. Kane tilted his head, almost amused. "Kill you? No, that's far too crude, you'll simply cease to exist." Before Michael could react, headlights flared behind them, flooding the lot with blinding light. A truck roared in from the road, horn blaring. Kane and his men scattered into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. The truck skidded to a stop, and the driver, an old reporter named Jonah Reeves who'd once investigated the hospital, leaned out the window shouting, "Gee. Ed in now." Michael, Mills, and Claire dove into the cab just as bullets shattered the rear windshield. As the truck tore away from the service station, Michael looked back. Kane stood at the edge of the lot, calm as ever, raising one hand in a slow, deliberate wave as if to promise this wasn't over. The truck roared down the empty highway, engine straining, wind whipping through the shattered rear window. Michael clutched the envelope of files tight against his chest, as if Kane himself might reach through the glass to tear it away. Beside him, Claire stared straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the door handle. Jonah Reeves didn't slow until they were 20 miles out of town, pulling off onto a narrow farm road lined with skeletal trees. He killed the headlights and let the truck idle in darkness. "I've been keeping tabs on Kane for years," Jonah said, glancing over his shoulder. "You're lucky I was nearby, he doesn't usually miss." Mills exhaled sharply. "So you know what we're dealing with?" Jonah nodded grimly. "I know enough." Kane's been bankrolling medical research projects across 3 states, front companies, shell charities. St. Mary's was just one of his testing grounds. Every time someone gets too close, they vanish. Cops won't touch him, politicians won't even say his name. Michael leaned forward. "Then how do we stop him?" Jonah tapped the steering wheel. "You don't go after Kane directly, you go after his money. Find where it's coming from, find who else is in on it, and shine a light so bright they can't cover it up." Claire finally spoke, her voice low. "That's not going to be easy. Half the people on his payroll don't even know they're working for him." Mills looked out the window, scanning the empty road. "Then we start with what we have. These files, the names, the experiments, if we can get them to someone who can't be bought." A distant hum cut through the night, faint but unmistakable. Another car approaching fast. Jonah threw the truck into gear. "We move now," he said. "If Kane's men followed us, we're out of time." As the truck sped off again, Michael caught his reflection in the side mirror. He barely recognized himself, eyes hollow, jaw set, adrenaline masking fear. Somewhere behind them, under the cover of darkness, Richard Kane was still watching. And Michael knew with absolute certainty, this was only the beginning. The sun was just beginning to rise as they crossed the county line, painting the horizon in dull orange streaks. For the first time all night, the world seemed quiet, but none of them felt safe. Michael rested his head against the window, clutching the envelope tighter than ever. Inside were names, dates, signatures, proof of everything they'd risked their lives to find. Proof that could bring Richard Kane's empire crashing down, if only they lived long enough to share it. Jonah pulled onto a gravel turnout and cut the engine. "This is where I leave you," he said, glancing at them with an intensity that made the cab feel smaller. "Keep moving, don't trust anyone. And when you get where you're going, make sure people see this." Claire looked over at Michael, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Michael didn't answer right away. He stared at the files, then at the empty road stretching ahead. "They'll have to," he said finally, "because if they don't, Kane wins, and we're not letting that happen." Jonah opened the door and stepped out, vanishing into the early morning mist without another word. The truck rolled forward again, tires crunching over gravel, carrying them deeper into uncertainty. But Michael felt something stirring beneath the fear, a sense of purpose, sharp and unshakable. The truth was out there now in their hands, waiting to be seen, waiting to burn. If you followed this far, don't let it end here, dig deeper. Ask questions, share this story with anyone who will listen. Someone out there knows more than they're saying, and the only way to stop men like Richard Kane is to bring their secrets into the light. Keep watching, keep searching, and don't look away. The next file might be closer than you think.